Hi, I have an interesting case here that has several fit issues, and so I think it would be interesting to go over why that is happening and how to avoid work around it, and also just not do certain things that are causing some trouble here. So first, the most obvious problem, if you just flip it over and you take a look down here, there's some really ugly stuff that is popping up here that really is not in it's in the final part, but it most certainly is not in the scan. And it's also not in the blockout or refractory. So that's pretty interesting. It turns out, and it took me a while to track this one down, it turns out that if we go into the imported parts, and there's a lot of imported parts that are not used, and that's actually part of the problem. And if we go through these guys here, there is this particular one here, the STL, the SOLC object and the STL SOLC, and they are actually the same object, and they're both set to be imported. So if we go into settings here, and then we pick them out, so here it's actually set to be non-editable, which means to use the triangles in the final output. But at the same time, there's a duplicate object, this one, which is set to be editable, so it's converted into wax. That's actually what's causing the problem. So if we actually just change this guy to reference and turn him off, and because of that, it was actually being considered in the save for build, even though it was also being imported as wax as a duplicate object. So that's where the problem came from. Okay, so that's that problem. Now, then there's two other issues. Well, actually, there's one big issue and a smaller issue. And for those, we'll go to MeshLab. So here I have the output. We're looking at the bottom. I have it set to for bright red or deep red to be 100 micron offset, and then the dark blue would be 0, and there's a bunch of light blues which are around 20 microns. Actually, if we go quickly back over to the auto relief, the settings auto relief. So the settings here were modified. Clasps are usually at 0, so they're set here to have a static offset of 20 microns. And I bet you this blip here corresponds to that. So let's take a look. Oh no, that's not working. Let's try that again. Okay, here we go. All right, so we basically have for most of the clasp area, we have this this sort of lightish blue, which that corresponds to the 20 microns. The issue is that the clasp rests have a pretty significant offset. They're orange, that puts them around 60 microns, which is, that's way too much. They should be part of the clasp, and that's actually a shortcoming of the software. With this version of the software, it's not recognizing, because these are free-formed in, and it's not recognizing that as part of the clasp. I currently have a bunch of fixes for that which will be in a future release, but that's still in progress. So now the other thing in general, you can say like, well, this is probably too much offset for the major connector. Most people don't notice this or complain about it, which I'm actually surprised about, but it seems to be fine. But if you want less offset in your major connector, I can show you how to do that. I thought this was a problem here. If we look at this clasp, it has quite a bit of offset in here, but it turns out that has to do with the fact that we just this clasp is running over the blockout here. Right, so that's why there's that offset. Okay, let's see. Right, so the main thing is we want to have less of an offset for the major connector, and we want to fix the clasp rests. So in order to help the software identify these things, the easiest thing you can do is you can actually just add a dummy clasp I'm going to use this tool, which will project the curve through the wax onto the refractory instead of on top of the wax. And I'm just going to put a curve in here. And make a tiny clasp. It doesn't need to be visible. It's just, the point is that when I apply this, that really didn't change anything. It did add this clasp curve 5, which you can see is here, and this will force the software now to recognize this as part of the curve. And then when we're in auto relief here, it will apply the 20 micron offset as opposed to the more general offset. The other thing that we'll do here is, if you are really sure that you want to reduce the offset of your major connector, which is that you actually have a problem that there's too much space, you can turn the setting down. You could also maybe reduce this a little bit, but it gets dangerous to play with these too much. I mean, we came up with these defaults testing with a set of printers, trying to get like 99% a fit result on hundreds of cases. So if you change this, you might have success for 5 or 10 cases, and suddenly you'll have a whole bunch that won't fit. But fair enough. I mean, printers are more accurate than when we did the first tests. You may be able to get by with less dynamic relief if you really need it. So let me just turn it down that much, and let's see what we get. Okay, so the first test is to see what the bottom looks like. And sure enough, those weird artifacts are gone. So that was definitely caused by the duplicate imported parts playing different roles. As far as the clasps and the major connector goes, we should jump over into MeshLab. I mean, I'm assuming most of you are familiar with MeshLab. Just in case, it's a free program, and you can quickly get these. It's particularly useful for getting distances between objects. At least that's what I use it for. Let me just quick show you how to do that. So I turned off the scan, and you make all the changes to the actual object that you want colored. Change this to quality. Whoops. And that's a fast operation, and this one is a slower one, sampling Hausdorff distance. And here, this effectively is millimeters, so we don't really care about anything over 100 microns, so we'll just do it like that. This operation takes a little bit. Okay, it's done now. So now you make sure that's selected still, which it should be. You click on the psychedelic bunny, and then here, this histogram is actually pretty useful. So now you see in the range from 0 to 100 microns, you see that most of the offset is occurring just a little bit over 50 microns. So it should look about half of what it was before. You apply this, and yeah, sometimes you have to click on this again. I don't know why that is, but okay. You flip it over, so you see that this looks more reasonable for an offset. And also, I applied the modifications to this one, to this clasp rest. I didn't change that one. So you can see this is the old one. This is the one I actually changed, and now you see it's light blue, which is, yeah, it's probably these values here. So this corresponds to the 20 microns for the typical clasp offset. Okay, I hope I didn't cause more trouble than I solved, but especially the clasp rest is a good trick, and also be careful with your imported parts. And if you really feel very comfortable with changing your material settings or your auto relief settings, depending on what material and fabrication process you're using, you have a little bit of indication how to do that. I would recommend only doing that if you really have some problems.